everybody, and welcome to our presentation tonight. And I'm Rebecca Grappo. I'm going to be our moderator, and I'm really excited to introduce our friend, my friend, Francesca Kelly, who is going to be talking to us today about the use of artificial intelligence and college essays and anything else related to college. So I want to remind everybody that if you have a question, if you could please put it in the chat, and we'll try to address it when we get to the end. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Francesca Kelly. Francesca has been a friend of mine for many, many years, as we were both married to the Foreign Service. Francesca has been married for 41 years and served in a variety of international posts. She also is well known within the Foreign Service community and beyond for her writing skills. She's been an editor, writer. She co-authored the book Tales from a Small Planet, contributor to Foreign Service Life, and just an overall amazing person. So when she asked me if I would like to do this with her today, I was very excited and immediately said yes. So my name is Rebecca Grappo. I also work in college consulting. I also have a background with the U.S. Diplomatic Service. My husband was a career Foreign Service officer as well, and have had a similar path as Francesca's, but not exactly, which is why she's the star of the show. And without further ado, let's get started.
Oh, thank you very much, Becky. And I want to first say that Rebecca Grappo is extremely well regarded in the college admissions field. And you may have, if you're interested in American or international college admissions, you may have just as many questions for her as you have for me at the end. Like my friend Rebecca, I am a wife of a long-term diplomat. So what that means as far as having a career is that we often zigzag and we move from country to country and kind of make it up as we go. We kind of start over again at each place. Because my husband is a Russian speaker, we actually had lived in the former Soviet Union in the 1980s. And I do want to, before I start my talk, I want to just tell you a little bit about that, because I know this audience is mostly Russians, and perhaps a lot of people that weren't even born in Soviet times. But I would just like to tell you a little bit about my experiences quickly. When my husband was a doctoral student at Columbia back in the 80s, he was asked to take an exchange program to Leningrad for the academic year 83-84. So I went with him, and we flew with a group of students into Helsinki and then took a train to what was then called Leningrad, and then a bus to the dorms. As soon as our bus turned onto the Naberezhnaya, the banks of the Neva, I had a very unexpected and emotional reaction. I burst into tears. I had never seen anything like that. It was beautiful. It was otherworldly. It was like something out of a different time. And I'll just never forget that. We ended up living in a dormitory. It was Общежитие номер 2 on Vasilyevsky Ostrov. And I knew not a word of Russian. I never have studied Russian. All I had was a Berlitz guide, which I've kept with me to this day. But because my husband was doing the actual job and I was going out foraging for food and supplies, I had to learn Russian very, very quickly, or at least very bad Russian, so that I could communicate with people. It was risky back then for Russians to have contacts with foreigners, so we would call our Russian friends from a phone booth. I still have memorized our best friend's number, actually. They were intensely interested in Western things, in books, in magazines, in instant coffee. Our Russian friends often asked us to bring these things to them. I also really loved how are very good at making small talk and are very friendly, and it's easy to talk to Americans. In public, I found it wasn't as easy to talk to Russians, but once we got behind closed doors and had a nice meal together, It was just a wonderful discussion, very probing, bringing up all kinds of what ifs and ethical dilemmas. And I actually think that that's something that we may end up doing today because of generative AI and the issues that it brings up. A little bit later, in 1987, we arrived back in Leningrad for a diplomatic post, and Russia had just signed, or America and the Soviet Union, I should say, had just signed a cultural agreement. Relations from the Cold War period were thawing. Russian artists and musicians were going to America on exchanges. American artists and musicians came to Leningrad and Moscow, and we had some wonderful experiences. We were able to escort Dave Brubeck and his quartet to Tallinn for jazz concerts there, and also in Leningrad. The jazz enthusiasts in the Soviet Union were a large and enthusiastic group, and it was really wonderful to see how he was received there. We also, I don't know how many of you know the rock band Aquarium. Probably most of you do know its lead singer, Boris Grebenshikov, because I think he's still very active on social media. But we hosted them in our apartment quite a bit. We were in our 20s. They were in their 20s. They would drink up our entire liquor cabinet while we watched. We'd put a tape into the VCR and watch Warner Brothers and Looney Tunes cartoons like Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner and Daffy Duck and Bugs Bunny. And we had a wonderful time with them. It was really fun, a little wild. So back to how I got into this career path very quickly is that I have always been a writer. And when my own children, who I was raising overseas, had trouble finding college counselors, I started researching college admissions. One thing led to another, and I was writing a lot about college admissions. When an international high school in Brussels had an emergency opening for a college counselor, I suddenly was a college counselor, and that was kind of immersion by fire. After that, I ended up being an editor at a magazine or two. All those things have kind of combined into helping kids write their college application essays. They have to write at least one college application essay for many US colleges, often many more essays. And so I coach them on that, and I've been doing that for about 15 years. But is my career going to end? Are writing teachers and English teachers' careers going to end because of generative AI? Are we going to become obsolete? That's one of the questions I want to bring up today. I'm assuming that some of you maybe have tried either ChatGPT or another form of AI, maybe the Russian AI GigaChat. If not, you might want to, although there are data privacy concerns for all of them. So I want to get into generative AI. A little background. Artificial intelligence in one form or another has been in development for years, but it really kind of took off in 2012 with the creation of neural networks, and in 2018 with being able to train those neural networks as what are called large language models. By fall of 2019, OpenAI had released one of these called ChatGPT in a conversational format. And this is less than a year ago, as you know, and it just took off. I don't think any other entity on the internet, any other form of social media has exploded with as many viewers in such a short time. I tried it, and I want to share, I'm going to ask Robert, I think it is, to share a screen of how I tried it. Hopefully you'll find this interesting. The typical main college essay that is often in the common application used by many colleges in America asks you for something around a 550 to 650 word essay on a variety of topics. And this essay is personal. It's often about a challenge that you faced. So if you can see the top of this page, you'll see that this is the first and only prompt I gave ChatGPT. Write a 550 word college application essay in narrative form that tells a story about the writer's experience visiting his schizophrenic brother in a mental hospital. The essay should open with a scene that is compelling, because I often tell my students to start with something that draws the reader in. And then go back and tell a little family history, the sibling relationship, and finish with insights about what the writer has experienced and what he has learned. Okay, when I do this with students, it takes days. Sometimes it takes weeks. We work on brainstorming topics. We talk about what prompts we should use or not use. We talk about what values and what struggles or what story the writer wants to tell, the student wants to tell. They write a rough draft. I ask them questions to help them improve it. We talk about the structure of it. This takes a long time, okay? So I put this prompt in, and in about 30 seconds, this essay was generated in front of us. And you can't, I don't know if you can see the second page. Maybe, Robert, you can just scroll down and you can just see the second page there. But my jaw hit the floor when I saw this. It's a good essay. It's not a great essay. It's a little too narrative. It's a little too much. Here's what happened. I did this. I did that. But it answered the prompt that I gave it. And if I had given it a better prompt, asking for more details, it might have done an even better job. It certainly is better than most essays that most college admissions officers are going to be reading. So anyway, you can stop sharing it now if you don't mind, Robert. I just wanted to show that. So what does this mean for students? What does this mean for college admissions? Are students already using this? And yeah, the answer is yeah, they are. Some of them are. But even before generative AI, there have been questions about who's writing whose essays. And I know, Rebecca, you've had to deal with this too. We've all had students that we've worked with probably every season. I have at least one or two where I suspect that someone else is writing for them. Often parents are the ones who are doing this. It's something that I won't allow, and I have to bring it up very delicately. So the way I usually bring that up is to say something like, admissions officers are suspicious of too polished sounding essays that don't sound like they could be in a student's voice. And sometimes even style points, such as 2 spaces after each sentence, which is kind of an old-fashioned way of writing now, I think admissions officers will be suspicious of. So we have had to deal with this before. And I do wonder, one of the things I wonder about is whether there are really good natural writers as students who don't sound like students, and are they going to be penalized for that? Are they going to be suspected of using generative AI? The other thing I want to point out is that just as quickly as generative AI has sprung up, so have AI detection apps. Some are better than others. All are improving rapidly. I tested out parts of this essay with several different apps. The one that seemed to catch the AI generated sentences was something called GPT-0, which was designed by a Princeton undergraduate student, computer science student. There's also software that teachers and professors use called Turnitin. It usually catches it, but it's not always completely accurate.
Do you know, Francesca, do colleges have any policies about students using ChatGPT, or do the students have to sign a statement saying that they did not use ChatGPT? Are they addressing this in any way that you have heard of?
Colleges are scrambling to come up with policies. I wrote an article about this, about ChatGPT. I wrote it back in February or March. I contacted, I think, about half dozen colleges, including my own alma mater, Northwestern. No one wanted to talk about it on the record or off the record. They don't have policies in place. They're getting there. They're scrambling. There are many questions that they're wrestling with. Private universities don't want to get sued by angry parents because they've accused a student of cheating who may or may not have cheated. Until AI detection software is absolutely perfect, which I'm not sure it ever will be. They don't necessarily want to accuse students of using Chat GPT or generative AI, but they also have to deal with other questions. For example, I've heard of stories of students saying, well, the university's plagiarism policy says that I can't pass anyone else's work off as my own, but this isn't a person's work. This was, a computer work, an AI platform work. So it doesn't count. It's not plagiarism as defined by the university. So they're going to have to come up with policies. They're going to have to either rewrite their plagiarism policy, which most universities already have some sort of plagiarism policy. And I predict that probably they'll either rewrite it or completely come up with something new. Probably within a year or so, they're going to have to do this if they haven't already. What's happened is it's been kind of left up to the professors. Each professor, some will, like my husband, who teaches at Northwestern, basically said to his class, I don't want you to use ChatGPT or any other generative AI, period. Other professors will have said, okay, this is the way of the future. So here are the ways you can use it, and here are the ways you cannot use it. But until universities come up with set policies, and some have started, I believe, it's kind of left in the hands of professors and students, and it's very murky right now. So I don't know, Becky, do you think the SAT might bring back the in-person essay, and so that students, that's a writing sample basically?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I haven't seen any conversation about that, but that doesn't mean that it's not taking place.
Yeah.
I think that colleges are overwhelmed. They don't have an answer.
It's got to be
said. They don't know what to say. I can tell you that I was at a conference recently with some well-known universities, and
yeah, I can.
Okay. Yeah, regarding the writing portion of the SAT, it could be that conversations are taking place that we are not aware of. And some consultants asked admissions officers from some very well-known university not used, and their response was to laugh. So,
wow.
Yeah, they don't want to say anything, and the idea that they're going to take the lead, they just laughed. So I think people just don't know what to do. What's interesting, I think, about the essay that you showed, from my point of view, having helped students write essays, is that if a student were to generate that and submit it, and I were admissions officer, I still wouldn't be impressed. And the reason why is because I don't see anything coming from that student's heart about, other than it was hard to see my brother like that. But there was no growth, there was no insight, there was no, this is what I learned. It was impersonal. It felt more like a report on his brother's illness. And so what I'm telling my students is that ChatGPT can't get into your heart. Only you can get into your heart. And I've told students to start over again with their essays when they send me something that looks like a report. I'm like, this tells me nothing about who you are. It tells the admissions officer nothing about who you are and what you'll add. Do I think that I could always be fooled? Maybe, especially as it gets better and better. But for now, I think that we're still in the zone where an okay essay written by ChatGPT is still not going to be enough.
Yeah, I agree. I think some of it, and actually that leads right into what I wanted to talk about next, which is, what are the reasons not to use ChatGPT or generative AI in writing your essays? And that's the first one. This is a personal thing, not unlike the UK main essay and some other universities worldwide. The American ones, they want you to get personal. They want to know who you are. They want to know either something about your values, something that demonstrates how you responded to a challenging situation, or even the things that are most important to you. They want to see that. So can generative AI do that? I think it can only do that if you practically write half the essay in your prompt for them. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. You might as well do this on your own. It's really, like you said, generative AI right now, the way it is not going to really get to your essence. And they want to know your essence. And you want to tell them. That's a good thing, right?
Francesca, do you think that there's any place where using Chat GPT could be used in a positive way?
Yes.
So I just was planning a trip to Italy, and I thought, what do I do if I have 3 days in Verona? And in 20 seconds, I got some great ideas. So is there any place where it could be a good idea?
Yes, there is. It's the ways that I've used it are outlining. If you're not sure how to structure an essay, you could say, here's what I want to write about. What would be a possible structure? I've seen it do a pretty good job on that. I haven't seen it do a wonderful job on that. You could use it to help you brainstorm. If you, for example, want to somehow find connections between, let's say you're a volleyball player and you also do amateur theater work and you also want to be a lawyer someday. Maybe you could ask it, what are the connections between these things? And one of the things that I find interesting about at least ChatGPT, and I think probably the other main forms of generative AI like Microsoft Bing or Google Bard, is that you can regenerate a response. If you don't like what it wrote, you can just hit regenerate. At least with ChatGPT, you can do that. You can also talk to it and say, I don't like what you wrote. I want to talk more about my volleyball and team sports and teamwork and how that's going to relate to law. Do you have any ideas on that? You can tweak it however you want. The other thing I found really helpful was it is putting together a college list can be a really daunting task. There are not a lot of really great databases to search to find all the things that you want in a college. And so now it's very easy. I tested this out with ChatGPT. I said, I want to find colleges, put me together a list of colleges that have a double major in journalism and musicology, because I want to be a music critic in a city. And also I come from Southern California. I want to live in a place that has snow every year. I want 4 seasons. So I put all those things in, boom, 5 colleges right away. And I kind of fact checked them because you kind of have to do that. And they were good schools, Northwestern, Syracuse, there were some others. Searching for that kind of information before generative AI took a lot longer and was harder. I wanted to kind of get into another reason why it's good to write your own essay. There's a couple other things. This is an explorative process. If you're a high school senior, you're 17 or 18 years old, you're just kind of discovering who you are, what your motivations are, what your strengths and weaknesses are. I think if you're willing to take on this process and keep asking yourself, quite a really useful thing to do. I mean, I try to coach my students that way, but they can also do it for themselves. Here's an example. Let's say you write an essay about how you conquered your fear of swimming. So why were you afraid of taking swimming lessons, or why were you afraid to even go in the water? Okay, then they'll tell you the answer. Well, what did this represent to you, being in the water? How did you conquer that fear? Why did you feel it was necessary to conquer that fear? How have you changed? How does this affect the rest of your life? Things like that. If you just keep digging and digging and digging, I do feel that you go through a process that's really helpful in preparing you for college. And the other thing that people don't talk about much is the subliminal negative self-talk that comes from telling yourself, I need something else to write for me. Underneath, I don't even think people are aware of what they're saying to themselves. They're saying, I'm not up for this task. I can't write this by myself. I can't write, period. And something like that. I don't think that kind of negative self-talk is good to carry with you through life. I honestly think that doing the hard thing, picking a hard job apart, figuring out how to do it, trying it, failing it, trying again, I think that leads to a better feeling about what you can do, what you can accomplish. And sometimes I don't know what your experiences have been, but found that some of those problems come from parents, well-meaning parents who are basically telling their kids, you have to get into a great school. Oh, but you can't do it. You can't write it. You got to get help. I've got to write for you. I've got to do the process for you. You're not up for the job. I mean, that sends a really damaging message, I think. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but
Yeah, no, I agree. The other thing is I'm thinking that in theory, Chat GPT is crawling the internet to pull together things that have already been written. Is that correct? And that sometimes it even lags behind what's really, really current.
yes.
So when I think about some of the really beautiful essays that I have read from my students, they're writing about things that have never been written about before. So how is anybody going to find that on the internet and pull it out and put it into a new essay? So
Right.
some of the experiences, especially because as you and I both work with a lot of international students and foreign service kids and students who've moved around the world, and they've had unique experiences that few people have ever had, and how they process that, how they feel about it in their heart, again, I think is something ChatGPT can't pick up on, that because it was such
Right.
a unique experience that only our student has had. So I I think that that might be a limitation to some of those really, really insightful essays. And what you're saying too about, too much help, parents who want to help or sending the message to have Chat GPT write it for you, I think is really, really negative, as well as having too many adult fingers all over an essay.
Oh, I know.
I
Yes.
once had a student who wanted to apply to an Ivy League school, of which her parents were alum. And she was a great writer. She was in the IB program. She wrote a beautiful essay that sounded like a 17-year-old wrote it. And then our next session, she came back with a Word document with red track changes all over
Uh,
it. I could see mom, I could see dad, and then I saw two other people. I'm like, who's that? And she said, well, one is the IB coordinator and the other is a family friend. And they sucked the life out of her essay and made it sound like 40-year-olds with master's degrees who, were professionals, wrote the essay. And my heart just sank,
yes.
because if I were to tell, the family, you just sucked the life out of this girl's essay, but she's applying to a college that has less than a 5% admit rate. When she doesn't get in, they'll say, you see, we listened to you. If I say nothing, then it doesn't sound like a 17-year-old, and she probably still isn't going to get in.
I know.
So anyway, it was just a real dilemma in the end. I just presented the facts and let the family make the choice, and she was not admitted. But
Yeah, I know. I've had that happen almost every year. I actually have a policy, nobody else on the document. Just now, that doesn't mean they're going to do things behind the scenes. And the other thing I did want to make sure I mentioned was that I don't want to hold up Chat GPT or another generative AI to be, I don't want to excoriate them either, because they actually can help you become a better writer. If you use them judiciously, you can ask them to edit things. You can say, without writing any new sentences, how can I improve this? Or without your writing any new sentences, ChatGPT, how can I improve this essay? How can I find, one of the things that students often struggle with is finding transitional sentences between paragraphs. How can I, what's an idea for a transitional sentence or topic here? How can I link these two paragraphs? Is the structure good? Or would you suggest a different structure? Do I have any spelling mistakes? Do I have any grammatical mistakes? I don't think there's any problem with using that. People are already using stuff like Grammarly, which is kind of a basic form of AI.
yeah.
The other thing is, I think is going to happen, and I know there are English teachers in this group. I worry a little that we are the teachers of English and teachers and writing coaches and people like us are going to be relegated in the future to being prompt engineers. The people that write the best prompts get the best results. It's just a topic to explore. I think the ethical considerations are still there, but the ethics may change. It's definitely, it's being used in the business world. One of my own children has said that they use at his company, they use AI to write blog posts. That's a very different thing, because I think ethically that's okay. You can make sure that the message is what the company wants to say, and you can put at the bottom of it a disclaimer: this all or part of this was generated by AI, as long as it says what the company wants to say. But you can't do that if you're a student applying to college. And if a student thinks it's okay to do that, I'll say, okay, just make sure you tell them that you wrote part of this essay, that some of this essay is AI generated, and they'll say, okay, no, I won't do that.
I'll tell you, I had a student a couple of weeks ago that just got stuck in the middle of the essay and wasn't making the connections between what he had already written and where I thought he needed to go. Like, these lessons you learned in high school, how will they apply to your future professional life or your academic life? And we spent a lot of time with me questioning, probing, and he just kind of gave me that blank look. So finally, so you can all comment if you think that I failed in my moment. But I said, let's ask ChatGPT, how would these personal qualities be valuable to someone who wants to hire someone in this profession? And we got a little paragraph. And then I showed it to him and I said, look at 3 and 4. That's kind of where we need to go with this.
I think that's great.
Yeah. And he didn't copy it. And we're still working on it. We are still working on it. So
yeah, but I think that is a way that generative AI can really help.
yeah.
Really, it's good. And then there's also the larger implications. I don't want to go too much into those, but I mean, it's going to be amazing in the field of medicine. You could feed unusual or rare symptoms into some huge medical database and perhaps get a possible diagnosis of something you hadn't thought of. You could ask it to evaluate what the risks are of doing a surgery on somebody who has comorbidities, or you could ask it to evaluate different treatment options for somebody of a certain age, height, weight, whatever. I think it's going to do a lot of good there. Unfortunately, one of the things that people are talking about is how it might be used in warfare and with weaponry. There are good things about that. If you use drones that are powered by AI to evaluate a situation on the ground, they probably would be able to evaluate something faster so that there are fewer civilian casualties. But if these weapons get into the wrong hands, then anything could happen. And so I think a lot of military personnel are talking about this right now. I'm trying to think how else. Go ahead, Becky. Yeah.
Yeah, I had an interesting experience a couple weeks ago. I was scrolling through Instagram and a house appeared that was dreamy. Like, oh, wow, that would be ideal. It looked very European with a lot of American features, beautiful landscaping, gorgeous picture windows, etc. So I sent it to a friend of mine who's a designer, and I was like, oh, wouldn't this be amazing? And he swooned over it too. Sunday, another designer that I follow was looking for AI generated images in the design world. And that very one was one of them.
Oh, wow.
So I talked about it with my friend and I was like, I didn't pick up on that it was AI. Did you? And he said, no. And so there's a lot of conversation. It's an example within the creative world too about, are we creatives still going to be needed? But then I said, well, wouldn't that be kind of cool though, if you are renovating a house or designing something, that you could image it before construction? Like, that would be, to me, an interesting use. You still need the craftsman. You can't get a computer to create something that
Right.
hands are still needed to do, but maybe it could help. I mean, I just think it's just going to blow people's minds about the ways that it can be used.
Yes, I think we haven't even explored all the ways it can be used, and it's going to keep. I mean, it can learn, so it's going to keep doing things. The one thing I did want to touch on is the fact that generative AI can also generate bad information, false information, misinformation. It's been trained on all of the internet. So you all know what's on the internet. There's a lot of misinformation on there. I found it fascinating that ChatGPT used Reddit, which has 50 million users worldwide, to kind of learn to mimic conversations. I think actually that was a good choice, but there are also data things involved, data privacy matters. The FTC in America is now in OpenAI for the use of data and how it's been, how it has gathered data to train its AI too. But anyway, you have to fact check. You quickly, but it can just also generate outright falsehoods, and so you have to fact check. And I have found glitches when I've put in certain prompts, and I've gotten glitches. And there's actually a really there's a New York Times article written by Kevin Roos, I think his name was. I'll try to put that link in the chat. He had a very disturbing conversation with, I believe it was ChatGPT and their bot, where the thing started going off on having a second personality, and that it felt that it was in love with him. And it was very, very odd. So there are still glitches to be worked out and ramifications that we don't know about. They call them emergent behaviors. When they started training these large language models, they would find that what they call emergent behaviors would arise, things that they hadn't anticipated. For example, a generative AI being able to learn on its own just by having analyzed so much data how to code. It can code. They didn't teach it that, it just learned it. So I think we're still a little bit in the weeds on knowing what this can and cannot do.
Wow. Can you imagine how it could be used in politics as well?
I think deep fakes, that's already being used. There were already, like, there was something about Donald Trump going to jail or being arrested, which was generated by AI. Yeah. So there's a lot to talk about with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A little scary in a
It
way.
is. I know we have a lot of questions. So is there anything else that you want to mention? Here?
Well, I just thought I'd share an experience. I was in a workshop with some other counselors like myself, where we were talking about using AI to generate a blog post. You enter into the prompt what you want to write about, and it would generate a blog post, and generating titles for Instagram or social media, or all kinds of things that it can do for you. There are people I've met who have actually been certified in the ethical use of AI, which I found really interesting. So anyway, I said, okay, the 20 of us or however many of us were there, if we all want to write a blog about the same topic, are all of our blogs going to sound alike? And we all went, I don't know, let's try it. So we all entered the same prompt, and everybody got a slightly different answer. Maybe the points were scrambled, maybe the wording was a little bit different, but it was interesting that it wasn't exactly the same, even though we all gave it the same information.
Yes, and I've actually put the same prompt in, and it's generated a different essay. So it does kind of redo itself. It keeps revising itself. Yeah. One of the things I wanted to mention that the late, great astrophysicist Stephen Hawking once said is that about powerful AI, that it's either the best or the worst thing to ever happen to humanity. And we don't know that yet. But I would love to hear what people think. Maybe we should get to some questions.
Yeah, why don't we do the questions? How about if I read the first question for you, Francesca, and see your take on this?
All right.
What was the most unusual or challenging college essay prompt that you've come across in your career, and how did you guide the student through it?
That's a good question. I can't think of, well, let me just mention a few things. University of Chicago always has really interesting prompts. They are written often by current students, and their University of Chicago is looking for a certain type of student who will read these prompts and go, ooh. Whereas most students will read a University of Chicago prompt and go, what? They
Ooh.
want the ooh student. And they have prompts, they have funny prompts. They have things like, one of them that I had a guy write on was just compare apples to oranges. That's all. So a very creative, think outside the box kind of student is going to run with that. But that's kind of their way of weeding people out. And I have had students where I realize they are not the kind of student, they're not the kind of writer or thinker, not necessarily bad, just not that kind of thinker that University of Chicago wants. And it's sometimes been problematic to say, no, you actually have to go way outside what you're talking about now is kind of your typical essay, and they want atypical. So that's been hard. And I also find the hardest things that I've had to work with, and I'd be curious to see what you say, the hardest students are sometimes the students who do not think they live interesting lives and do not talk about that. I do this and I play soccer. Do you like it? Yeah. Do you have any pets? I'll ask them all kinds of questions to draw them out. Do you have any pets? Yeah, we have a dog. How do you feel about your dog? She's okay. So I often give them lots of brainstorming and lots of, we usually find something. I'll ask them to describe their bedroom to me. What's in your bedroom? I'll ask them to describe a vacation they've been on, anything I can think of to try to get that first topic. Once we have a topic, something we can talk about, I can help them get to the finish line. I know I can. Even what they originally write is a little prosaic and kind of boring. The big thing that helps with those kinds of essays are specifics, are finding specific things to talk about, specific names of books they like to read. I think that's what elevates a lot of kind of boring essays. So those are the two things that spring to mind. The only other difficulties I've had are when parents are trying to interfere in the process. What about you?
Similar. Recently, this just happened twice in the last week, and that is that I find that we're getting through it. We've got an essay. We're getting towards the end, and then I'll ask a little bit more about something, and the real story comes out.
Yes.
And I'm like, whoa. Quickly make some notes as you're talking to me, because that is the essence of what you really should probably write about, because now your whole essay just took on a whole new life, because you're talking about an experience that you hadn't shared with me before and that you probably didn't think was all that interesting. And that's very interesting. So this is why I think real essay writing is so labor intensive. It just takes such a long time, because even like sometimes you might be thinking you're there to the end. I had a student where we were at the end. I loved his essay. I thought, oh, this is a winner. And then we had the Supreme Court decision about affirmative action. And I think that there are going to be a lot of essays coming around about race, and that there might even be a race to be the most dramatic story about how you've been impacted by race, especially because Justice Roberts practically invited everybody to do that. So here we go. I said, I think we need to take a different angle on your experience, and let's amplify something else in the essay. Right. So anyway, the student wants to be done. I'll be honest, sometimes I really want to be done too. I want this baby to be born and so to go back and go, let's do that again though. I mean, it takes time, and I think experience too. I think you've seen it a lot. And we get better at this as we go along. And there's no easy answer for what makes a great essay. Right. But the great essays that I love are the ones that grab me, either make me laugh or they touch something in my empathy, or maybe even make me cry. Not often. I don't think essays need to make people cry, but the student's emotion comes out and pulls you in. And to
Yes.
me, that is what is really authentic.
Yes, I
And a
agree.
winner.
I actually see a question here that I want to answer. Somebody says, it seems to me that the question here is about how to set tasks for the GPT chat. If your request is formulated in a rather dry manner, for example, if I give it a description of some of my own experiences, provide context, and ask it to generate some conclusions, or write an essay based on the advice from a particular book, I think the result could be outstanding. Could you comment on this approach? This is where I'm talking about where people might become prompt doctors or prompt engineers rather than writing coaches. I have some ethical issues with this. I would kind of rather that you went through the process of writing before. I understand what the writer is saying, and I think we're moving that way. And I think that it may be that the gray area of ethics gets murky. I mean, for example, I know of college students who already will have ChatGPT or another generative AI write a college paper or write their college admissions essay. They will then take that and they will change enough sentences in it and put them more into their own words so that an AI detection will not catch it. So they're kind of deliberately cheating. On the other hand, if you end up, for example, giving it an extremely precise prompt, like this person says, and say, these are the objects in my room. Let's say you're going to write what they call a montage essay, not a narrative. So you're talking about different items, say in your room, and it could be, montage essays can be anything, experiences, family cars, it could be anything. But let's say you're going to write about the most important objects in your bedroom and why and how they're connected and what they mean to you. Maybe one came from a place you lived and another came from a different place. If you formulated a prompt that was so detailed and practically wrote your essay and fed it in, yeah, you would probably get an outstanding result. The other thing, what you really have to ask yourself are the ethical questions of this. And I think people are always going to disagree on that. The other thing, I lost my train of thought. Well, I'm just thinking about prompts and how you can do this. I've forgotten what I was going to say there. There was something else I wanted to say about that kind of writing. If you ask AI to kind of find you better words, is that you or is that AI writing? If you write a very, very, very rough draft and then AI elevates it, is that AI or you? But if you write a prompt that has everything you wanted, you've practically written the whole essay, and then this is kind of the final touch, I don't know if that crosses a line or not. I think it's all going to have to do with prompts. I know what I wanted to say. If nothing else, generative AI is a fantastic mimic. So people are kind of gaming the system by saying, here are some sample essays from this website that coaches kids on their essays. Please write an essay about this topic in the style of these essays. I have seen it do that in a very scary way.
Wow.
So that brings up a lot of questions.
So here's a response I have to that, and that is that our whole academic record is there. And they have letters of recommendations from their teachers. They're going to have their grades in whatever writing classes that they took. And so if a student has always been a mediocre writer, a struggling writer, a non-exceptional writer, and then all of a sudden their college essay is extraordinary and it doesn't match the rest of their profile, I think that raises red flags. If a student is going to be taking an IELTS or a TOEFL exam about their English language ability, and then all of a sudden they go to ChatGPT and ChatGPT churns something out that is not appropriate for someone at their level to write. The other thing is, word suggestions. There are some word suggestions that if you're not a native speaker, you might use that word and it would be inappropriate, or not the word that a 17-year-old non-native English speaker would ever use, or a native English speaker would ever use. So I think that you have to be careful about that too. Just like having somebody else write the essay for you. I once had a student, an international student, who was a mediocre student, mediocre TOEFL score, mediocre SATs, and he missed appointment after appointment for writing the supplements, and lo and behold, one day they all appeared in my inbox and they were perfect. And I just said, somebody in your dad's office wrote these for you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like if it's exposed, you're going to have your admission decision rescinded.
Right. If we can tell, they can tell. And I think college admissions officers may actually start using AI detectors, and that would just completely end your chances of admission I believe, for most colleges. What other questions do we have here?
We've kind of touched on some of these in some of our other parts of the conversation. Somebody wanted to know an example, question number 4, about an example of a college essay that you consider outstanding. And, because we don't have those essays and we're not going to show them, I would just point out that there are websites out there. So, for example, Johns Hopkins has college essays that worked. You can enter, a lot of colleges will have a site where they say college essays that worked. The college essay guy is somebody that
whom I've worked for. Yeah.
Ethan Sawyer just churns it out.
Yes.
And I use his materials a lot with my students as well. And he has wonderful examples.
Yeah, it's the college. I think it's the collegeessayguy.com. I worked for him for a couple of years, and they do a fantastic job, and they do give you sample essays. Some of the samples, we've talked about this, are so stellar they may actually cause some students to feel like, I'll never be able to write like that, but you shouldn't feel that way. They just kind of show the best ones. Some of the most common mistakes in essays written by Russians. I've actually worked with quite a few Russian clients. I don't want to get into the grammatical stuff, because our language is structured slightly differently. So sometimes there are articles missing and that kind of thing. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to if you're coming from a foreign country, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing to have a few things that kind of sound like you're from a foreign country and you don't have a full command of English, because that is how you talk and that is how you think. And at least they'll know that I think if it were too polished and that it might raise red flags. So I think it's all right to have some little glitches or little mistakes. But in general, the thing that I see the most that I want to change with students, that I help them change, is not getting specific enough. If you have been asked to write about, for example, a lot of colleges will ask for a why do you want to go here? Why us? Why this college essay? That's an addition to the main essay. I see so many people writing in very general terms, but this goes for all writing. When you write in general terms, if you say, for example, I love history, I've always loved history, I've read all kinds of history books and I've watched documentaries, that's just not very compelling or interesting. But if you show it rather than tell it, if you say a book, name a book title about Winston Churchill. I loved Robert Caro's biographies of Lyndon Johnson because they showed, I think you should get really geeky, really nerdy, and show that you just love this stuff so much by telling us all you've watched this documentary, you've read this book, and then give us a little of your analysis of them and why you love them. It's the general terms that drag an essay down. Specifics elevate it.
Yeah, too much telling and not enough showing. Yeah. Don't make it read like a report. Tell us why it's relevant to you, and make it interesting. I'll close by saying, well, you'll close, but I want to make one point, and that is that I've had, I tell students, listen, you never know who's going to read your essay and what time of day. Your essay might be the one they read at 11 o'clock at night after a full day of work, running the kids, putting everybody to bed, cleaning up the kitchen, and now they're going to sit down and read a few more essays because they got to keep it moving. And do you want your essay to put them to sleep, or do you want them to perk up? So, keep that in mind. If you're bored, they're going to be bored too.
Right. And I've said the same thing to my students. That's so funny. And also the idea that you create some tension in the first paragraph. Don't give it all away. If something happened to you, leave us hanging. Tell us you're in a situation, we don't know how it's going to be resolved. Then in the next paragraph or two, go into some background about how you got into that situation. Don't resolve it till later on, and then tell us what you learned about it. If you resolve it all in the first paragraph, we don't need to read anymore. It's boring.
True.
So that's another thing. And, studies have shown that readers' eyes are drawn to quotations, capitalized words, and italicized words. So anytime you mention a book title that you love, or a documentary you love, or you maybe put one line of dialogue in, my friend said, the eye goes right to those things. They really do, on a subliminal level, liven up writing. If a admissions reader is reading, like you say, late at night, and they just see a string of words with nothing that kind of sets them apart, no capitalized words, no italics, they're just going to fall asleep. Even if you've written about a good story, try to put those specifics in there if you can.
I think we're going to have to wind this up.
Yeah, we are. Yeah.
We could keep talking for another hour about this, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But thank you, Francesca, for sharing your wisdom and all the research that you've done about ChatGPT.
There is so much we could talk about. I do want to end up with these words. I've thought a lot about this lately in what's going on in the world. I feel like we, human beings have two sides to us. We have the creative side and we have the destructive side. So what I want to see AI do is to enhance our creative side. What I'm worried about is that we will abdicate our creative side to AI. And I believe that leads to a sort of inertia, and inertia can lead to destructive tendencies. I think human beings have shown great creativity in creating AI, but it's only good if we use it to create something else and use it wisely. If we can save the planet somehow with it, if we can capture carbon, if we can fight wars without any casualties, if we can use it creatively instead of abdicating our powers of creativity to it, I think these are the questions that we have to ask ourselves: is what purpose is it serving us, and how is it enhancing the best side of humanity, not the worst side of humanity? So that's the last thing I would want to say.
Perfectly stated.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Francesca. This has been really fun.
Yeah, this has. Thank you, Becky, for being there with me. Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks.